when a human being reaches the age of 40. And there's a phenomenon known in the West that many people in the West, and maybe even us, think about, but it's a phenomenon that is dubbed the midlife crisis. Many of you have heard of this term. In fact, it's when someone reaches the middle of his life, around 40 years old, and they go through many questions. They go through many questionings. Is this life that I'm living? Am I on the right path? Did I make the right choices? Am I raising my children properly? Am I happy with my career? Did I make the right decisions in studying this science or this discipline? So many questions come through some of the people, of course, not everyone, when they go through this midlife crisis. This phenomenon is so rampant that psychologists have written books about it. Many books, if you look in the literature, you find many books around this phenomenon, the midlife crisis. One book from the 1800s, so this is not new. One book from the 1800s from an author, a psychologist called Granville Stanley Hill, mentions that life, bounded by birth and death, has 5 stages, with the middle life representing the apex of our aggregate of powers. So when someone reaches the middle of his life, around the age of 40, they pretty much reach the peak of their lives. They've reached a point where they're mature enough. They've learned a lot from previous experiences in life. They probably are married. They probably have children. Maybe they had elderly parents. So they're very much at the middle point of their life, assuming that they will reach an age maybe of 80, 90 years old, especially in this day and age. And so psychologists describe this point in life as maybe the peak of someone's life, because usually your health is generally good. You've reached a certain level of maturity, and you're truly at a point where you can deliver really good results to the community, really good results to the society. And in fact, it is a pivotal point in someone's life. It's a point where you're balancing growth and decline, because after 40, it starts to decline from there. It's a point where you're linking your earlier learnings from life and looking into the future. It's a point where you're bridging between the younger generation and the older generations. And this is truly a pivotal point in anybody's life. In Islamic tradition, the age of 40 is mentioned in many, many different narrations, whether it's narrations from the Ahlul Bayt or whether it's verses from the Holy Quran like the one that I mentioned. For example, a narration from the Holy Prophet alayhi salatu wassalam. He says, من جاوز الأربعين ولم يغلب خيره شره فليتجهز إلى النار. Very interesting narration, very strong narration. The Prophet says, he who reaches the age of 40, while his good qualities do not overcome his bad qualities, let him get ready for the hellfire. This is an interesting narration, very strong language, to the point that when you reach the age of 40, the religion of Islam expects you to have reached a level of maturity where you are fully guided, where you have reached a point where that point in your life will represent the next 40 years in your life. And that's why the Prophet says, if your bad qualities have not been overtaken by your good qualities, there's a problem. If you look at the seerah of the Holy Prophets, he was married at the age of 25. He was a successful businessman. He was known in his community as a Sadiq al-Amin. And then he declared his mission of Islam at the age of 40, at the apex of his age. And so that brings me back to the verse that I started with. which in fact is a beautiful verse if we only ponder about it. The verse says, وَوَصَّيْنَا الْإِنسَانَ بِوَالِدَيْهِ. We have advised or commanded people to honor their parents. So Allah is talking to us, in fact to every human being, man and woman, to honor your parents. Why? And the interesting wording that the Quran uses was وَوَصَّيْنَا. Wasayna comes from wasiya, meaning a kind advice. Allah is giving us a kind of advice to have kindness towards our parents. حَمَلَتْهُ أُمُّهُ كُرْهًا وَوَضَعَتْهُ كُرْهًا. Allah is reminding you that your life started where your mother was carrying you with hardship. For 9 months, our mothers carried us through hardship. And then the day we are born is another day of hardship. حَمَلَتْهُ أُمُّهُ كُرْهًا وَوَضَعَتْهُ كُرْهًا. His mother or their mother bore them in hardship and delivered them in hardship. So Allah is reminding you that you came on this earth through the hardship of your parents. And then the verse pivots, and that's the interesting pivot. The verse says, وَإِذَا بَلُغَ أَشُدَّهُ وَإِذَا بَلَغَ أَشُدَّهُ. And when he reaches, again talking about this human being, so he reminded us of when we were young, when we were born, he reminded us of being kind to our parents, and then fast forward to when you reach the age of maturity, the age of 40. The verse explicitly mentions the age of 40. Whenever this child reaches their prime, at the age of 40. That's why I started with this midlife crisis. Here in the West, people go through all kinds of things, the midlife crisis. Allah is telling us, when you reach that point, the age of 40, what should we do? And that's the interesting part. And this is where, when I read that verse, I realized that Allah is talking to me, talking to all of us, in fact. وَبَلَغَ 40 سنة قال ربي أوزعني. This is the famous dua. Sometimes you hear this dua in salah. ربي أوزعني. Oh Allah, inspire me. أن أشكر نعمتك. That I am grateful and thankful for the blessings. So now that you have reached the age of 40, Allah is telling you, remember all those years before you. First, remember your parents. Your parents, act kindness with them, in kindness with them. Remember your mother, when she brought you into this world, she brought you in hardship. Your father as well, of course. And when you reach that point, make this dua. Oh Allah, inspire me to always be grateful for your favors, which you blessed me and my parents. And this is interesting. When you're at the age of 40, you're truly in the middle. You have maybe some kids that you are taking care of. You have parents that you must be taking care of. And that's why this age is so important. As we're talking, and the topic of my speech today is balancing intergenerational identity. This balancing of intergenerational identity must pass through the community or the age group of 40, because this is the age group that has reached their apex. And any community will have a group of people that are between 35 and 45. That's basically the age that Allah is talking about here. My Lord, inspire me to always be grateful for your favors, which you blessed me with, and my parents. Even in this, so these that please you. وَأَنْ أَعْمَلَ صَالِحًا تَرْضَاهُ. This is very important. We're asking Allah to inspire you first to be grateful, because the state of gratefulness is one of the highest states that human beings can be. If you are not grateful, you will do all kinds of mistakes. But if you walk on this earth being grateful for what Allah has given you, you'll be inspired in doing all the good deeds, especially for those that are leading the community, those that are closer to the age of 40. They need to always remember to be grateful for what their parents have given them, what the previous generation has given them, and what they will contribute to the next generation. To inspire me to do good but not any good. Sometimes we think we are doing good because we have an idea of what a good deed is. But the verse says, وَأَنْ أَعْمَلَ صَالِحًا تَرْضَاهُ, that I do a good deed that Allah, you will accept, that you will be happy with. And the centrality of the good deed here is that you're doing it for the sake of Allah, and you're doing it so that Allah is happy with you. And this is really what guides our good deeds. وَأَعْمَلَ صَالِحًا تَرْضَاهُ وَأَصْلِحْ لِي فِي ذُرِّيَّتِي. This is beautiful. Allah is telling you that not only you pray for the previous generation, you pray for your parents and those that raise you, but at this age, you need to be extremely cautious and extremely concerned about the next generation, about your progeny. وَأَصْلِحْ لِي فِي ذُرِّيَّتِي, and instill righteousness in my offspring. This is the age where we have to pay careful attention to raise the next generation, to raise the generation that is coming after us. And then the verse ends, Inni tubtu ilayka wa in. O Allah, I truly repent to you and I truly submit to your will. It is as if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is describing a human being that has lived through his 20s or her 20s and his 30s or her 30s, and they've reached that level of maturity where they realize that they've made some mistakes in the past. They've realized that now they're responsible for the younger generation. They've realized that they have an older generation that they have to care about. And they come to that realization, and their realization ends with a tawbah. To say, oh Allah, I've made so many mistakes, but now I've realized I've reached this age of maturity that I asked for your forgiveness, and help me raise the next generation. Help me remember the older generation so that I'm always grateful for your path. And why is this important? Why did I choose this verse for the topic of intergenerational identity? In any community, in fact, is made up of families. Families where you have parents, you have children, maybe you have grandparents, you have all the generations in these families. Psychologists today talk about 5 generations in this world today, in our day and age. They call them the baby boomers, which are the generation that maybe are in their 70s, 80s today, maybe the 90s. Then you got the Generation X. These are people that are maybe between 45 and 65 today. Then you have the millennials, who are people that are maybe between 30 and 45 today. These are the people that are at the midlife. These are the people that this verse that I talked about is concerning them. Then you got the younger generation, those that are called the Gen Zs of today. These are our children. These are the teenagers of today, the children of today. And then you have Generation Alpha, which is the smaller children. This is the people that are 12 years and younger. And then you have Generation Beta, which is just being born. So I'm not going to talk about those. So 5 generations that encompass any community today. How do we balance between these 5 generations? How do we ensure that as a community, we're not only catering to the older traditional generation, but that we have something for everyone? Because Rasulullah says, the Quran says, وَفِفُوهُنْ إِنَّهُمْ مَسْئُولُونَ. Stop them because they are responsible. Everyone is responsible. Rasulullah says, كُلُّكُمْ رَاعٍ وَكُلُّكُمْ مَسْئُولٌ عَنْ رَعِيَّتِهِ. We are all shepherds and we are all responsible for our group, for our cohort. And so we are all responsible for the younger generation. And of course, we have to enable and support the older generation as well. And so where does balancing start? This balancing must first start at home. It doesn't start in the community, in the masjid, in the imam barga. It starts at home. As I mentioned, every community is composed of families, various families, the father, the mother. If within that family, they don't pay attention in talking to the kids, in spending time to the kids, with the kids. It may be playing with the kids, removing that gap. Oftentimes you see in families or even in communities, there's a gap between the younger generation and the older generation. They don't talk to each other. They don't understand each other. Whereas when we look at the seerah of Rasulullah, Rasulullah was spending time with children, not just with Al-Hassan and Al-Hussein, his grandchildren. But whenever he would pass by and see children, he would stop and play with them. He would ensure that children don't feel alienated from the rest of the community. Children wouldn't say, this masjid, this gathering is for the old, for the elderly. I'm not going to be with them because they don't understand. Children would relate with Rasulullah just like adults would relate to Rasulullah. And so when we want to establish this balance, we start up paying that we need to relate with our children as young as they are. We need to be able to understand what they're going through. We need to be able to understand what's happening in school. We need to be able to understand what is the context of their generation that's influencing the way they think. Because we, this generation, our generation, the 40-year-olds, the 35, the 45, we are responsible to invest in the generation that will come after us. In 20, 30, 40 years, when we reach our old age, this generation will pick up. And they are the ones that will care about us. And so think about it as a form of investment for the next 20 years. Imam Ali alayhi salam mentions in a hadith, he says, لا تقصروا أولادكم على آدابكم فإنهم مخلوقون لزمان غير زمان. He says, don't force your children to your cultural habits, as they were created for a time different than your time. This is very important. This is a lesson for all of us. Anyone who leads a community, anyone who leads a group, Imam Ali is telling us, if we have cultural habits, maybe we brought them from our countries, maybe we have them because we're from a certain generation, we were influenced by some ideas. These ideas, these cultural inferences, our children don't relate to. However, the principles of the religion, they stay the same. They are stable. We need to ensure to give them the principles of religion, but to be flexible with the form, flexible with the cultural aspects, flexible with the cultural traditions. This is Imam Ali telling us. Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam has said, خَيْرُ شَبَابِكُمْ مَنْ تَشَبَّهَ بِكُهُولِكُمْ وَشَرُّ كُهُولِكُمْ مَنْ تَشَبَّهَ بِشَبَابِكُمْ. Very beautiful hadith. He says, the best of your youths are those that emulate the good adults from them. Kuhulika. And the worst of your kuhul, the kahal, is the adult that is around 35, 40 years old. Not a very old person, not a very young person. So it's someone that children might look up to. So he says, the best of your youth are those that emulate the best of your kahal, kuhul, the best of the adults. And the worst of your adults are those that emulate the youth. So if you're an adult and you're still acting like you're a teenager, hopefully none of us here, if we're still in that mode, we haven't reached that maturity, Rasulullah is telling us that this is the worst of the adults. Rasulullah would emphasize on being careful with the youth. If you think about the message of the prophets, the youth are the one that supported him first. When the prophet came with his son in the early days in Mecca, the ones that started following him are the youth, the 20-year-olds, the 25-year-olds, not the 60 and 70-year-olds. And then eventually, and some of the older generation of their time actually stood against Rasulullah. In a famous hadith, he says, Rasulullah says, أوصيكم بالشباب خيرا فإنهم أرق أفئدة إن الله بعثني بشيرا ونذيرا فحالفني الشباب وخالفني الشيوخ. He says, never mistreat your youth. Never mistreat the young ones amongst you, for they are particularly sensitive. The youth of today, especially the young, the teenagers, maybe 17, 18, 19, they're coming of age. They're feeling that maybe now, they're becoming a young man, a young woman. They're very sensitive because they're not sure where they are yet. They're still figuring things out. Rasulullah is telling us, never mistreat your youth, for they are particularly sensitive. It was them who backed me up and formed an alliance with me at the time when the elderly were waging a war against me. And so in any movement, any revolutionary movement, any movement that brings good change in a society usually is led by the youth. And that's why every community needs to pay particular attention to the youth. I will end with one last hadith, inshallah, just to make sure I also talk about the older generation. This is a hadith from Rasulullah, very strong hadith that says, ليس منا من لم يوقر كبيرنا ولم يرحم صغيرنا ولم يعرف فضلنا أهل البيت. Rasulullah uses very strong languages here. He says, he is not amongst us, he who does not respect his elders and does not have mercy on the youngers and does not know our place or our value, the Ahl al-Bayt. So Rasulullah is equating respecting the elders and taking care or having mercy on the youngers as knowing the Ahl al-Bayt. And so as we want to establish intergenerational balance,